So, it's 1965. Picture a typical brightly lit fourth grade classroom in Seattle.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And the teacher calls for the next show and tell presentation, right? And up to the front of the room walks this tiny, incredibly skinny 9-year-old kid with this really squeaky voice.
Just a completely unassuming kid.
Exactly. But he isn't carrying like a toy truck or a rock collection. He's lugging this heavy white bedsheet.
Oh, man. I know where this is going.
It's so wild. Blood is literally seeping through the fabric, like it's dripping onto the linoleum floor.
Which has to just traumatize a room full of 9-year-olds.
Oh, completely. The room goes dead silent. He heaves this bundle onto a desk, unwraps the sheet, and reveals a massive, freshly butchered cow's lung.
Just raw meat in the classroom.
Yeah. He had his dad help him get it from a local slaughterhouse, and, he doesn't even blink at the gore.
Right, he's totally unfazed.
Completely. He just starts pressing his small hands into this bloody organ, squishing it to physically demonstrate how oxygen transfer works in mammalian respiratory systems.
I mean, it's the ultimate contrarian show and tell.
It really is. And a classmate in the front row takes one look, turns completely pale, and faints dead away.
Because of course they did. That's horrific.
Right. The teacher is absolutely horrified. She makes him take this bleeding piece of meat outside where it just sits on the pavement for the rest of the day.
Just baking in the sun.
Exactly. But that kid, the one who looked at a standard elementary school assignment and decided the only logical way to execute it was to bring biological medical waste into a classroom.
Yeah.
That kid is going to grow up to completely rewrite the digital architecture of the modern world.
Because, that level of intense, unfiltered, entirely self-directed obsession, it doesn't just disappear. It scales up.
It scales up massively. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. When you look at the life of someone who has fundamentally changed human history, it's so easy to focus entirely on the output. Right?
Oh, absolutely. We all know the output of this particular life.
Exactly. We know Microsoft. We know the billions of dollars, the antitrust lawsuits, the global philanthropy. But today, you and I are doing something different.
We're looking under the hood.
Right. We are going on a mission to look strictly at the inputs. We're taking a deep dive into the raw, foundational source code of one of the most consequential minds of our time.
And we're using excerpts straight from the source text, his memoir, Source Code, My Beginnings.
Yeah. And if you're trying to figure out how a mind like that is actually programmed, you have to completely abandon the Hollywood narrative.
Oh, the Hollywood version is so inaccurate. It's always like a young boy sees a glowing computer screen, the heavens open up, and his destiny is instantly forged.
Right. The lightning strike of sheer innate genius. It's never actually like that.
Precisely. And, the setting seems perfectly primed for that myth, too. We really have to transport ourselves back to the Seattle of the 1960s.
Because it wasn't the tech hub it is today.
No, not at all. This isn't the slick, billionaire-heavy Seattle we know. This is a post-war, aerospace-driven city, deeply invested in the Cold War and the space race.
Right. Lots of Boeing engineers, lots of military contracts.
Exactly. And in 1962, Seattle hosted the Century 21 World's Fair, which was an absolute monument to techno-optimism.
They built the Space Needle for that, right?
They did. And they had all these exhibits showing off these early room-sized vacuum tube computers. The whole societal atmosphere was just drenched in this belief that massive engineering and scientific logic were going to solve every human problem.
But the text is very clear that the shiny public technology wasn't actually the hook for him. Like, he went to that World's Fair and he wasn't staring longingly at the mainframe computers.
No, he was way more interested in the roller coasters and the daredevil water skiers.
Which is such a funny detail because the real programming wasn't happening at a World's Fair exhibit. The foundational code of his intellect was being written in these incredibly quiet, intensely analog moments.
Right. At home. At the dinner table.
Yeah. I think about it like early hardware. We all arrive in the world with basic, raw wiring.
Or genetic baseline, sure.
Exactly. But the experiences we have, the arguments at the dinner table, our early failures, the bizarre little obsessions we're allowed to pursue, that's the software.
That's the operating system.
Right. It's the OS that actually tells the hardware how to process the world. And to understand how this kid eventually learns to write the software that runs the globe, we first have to pop the hood and look at the family algorithms that programmed him.
And in this particular family matrix, the master programmer, without a doubt, was his maternal grandmother, Adele Thompson.
Right. The family called her Gami.
Gami was an absolute force of nature. She grew up in a very tough rural railroad town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was a devout Christian Scientist, deeply principled, but above all else, she was a terrifyingly good card player.
Like professionally good.
Practically. Pounce, bridge, Coast Guard rummy, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
In this family ecosystem, if you wanted respect, you had to be good at games. And Gami was the apex predator of the card table.
That is amazing. She even gave him his nickname, didn't she?
She did. He was born William Henry Gates III. But because he was the third, she started calling him Trey when he was still in diapers.
Right, because a Trey is a 3 in cards.
Exactly. She was literally branding him with game terminology before he could walk.
That's so intense. And the programming started early, right? Like brutal programming.
Oh, very brutal. She started him playing Go Fish when he was just 5 years old.
And most grandparents, playing a game with a 5-year-old will let the kid win occasionally just to build confidence or whatever.
Just to keep them entertained. But Gami did not.
She didn't hold back at all.
Not even a little. For 5 straight years, she dealt the cards, played her absolute best, and completely crushed him.
Wait, so let me pause you there. What does that actually do to a kid? A highly competitive 5-year-old sitting there night after night just getting demolished by his grandmother.
Right, you'd think it would destroy his self-esteem.
Doesn't that just crush your spirit?
You would think so. But she wasn't just beating him, she was forcing him to observe a system.
Okay, a system. How so?
Well, in computer science, there's this fundamental concept called a state machine.
Right, a state machine.
Yeah, it's essentially an algorithm that receives an input, evaluates the current state of a complex set of conditions, and then calculates the optimal action based on probabilities.
So it's constantly updating based on new information.
Precisely. And Gami was operating as a highly tuned state machine at that card table.
Okay, so she's not just getting lucky, she's running the math in her head.
Exactly. And the young Trey would sit there, losing, but he was watching her intensely. He started to notice that even in completely unique situations like a hand of cards she had never seen before, she almost always made the mathematically optimal move.
She was calculating the odds on the fly.
Right. He would watch her discard a perfectly good card early in the game, which seemed like a mistake, only to realize 10 minutes later that it was a calculated sacrifice to set up an inevitable win down the line.
So she isn't giving him a lecture on game theory. She's forcing him to deduce it through repeated exposure.
She is modeling algorithmic thinking.
That is just incredible.
That is the core takeaway here. She was teaching him that the world, no matter how chaotic, random, or mysterious it might seem on the surface, can ultimately be understood and mastered if you just apply enough logic.
If you pay attention to the variables.
Exactly. If you track the variables and calculate the probabilities, you can decipher the system. It took him about 5 years of constant losing.
5 years is a long time for a kid.
It is. But eventually, the kid figured out her algorithm. He started winning. And the psychological reward of that, the dopamine hit of conquering a complex system through pure, cold logic, became the foundational bedrock of his mental software.
That is fascinating. So if Gami is installing the logic processor, his mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, is installing the engine.
The driving force, absolutely.
Because Mary does not sound like a gambler. She sounds like a highly efficient factory manager.
She was the absolute powerhouse of the household. She came from a very prominent, wealthy Seattle banking family.
Right, old money.
Yeah. Her own grandfather was a self-made banker who literally taught his family that games like golf weren't just leisure, they were proxies for business.
Make you use them to test people's character.
Exactly. They required skill, sobriety, endurance, and strategic thinking. Mary internalized that completely. She was incredibly gregarious, a natural leader.
And she broke a lot of boundaries, right?
She did. She pioneered a path from being a dedicated community volunteer to serving on major corporate boards, which was exceptionally rare for a woman at that time.
And she ran her family with a level of intensity that is honestly staggering. Like, she had this grand, sweeping vision for what her family should be.
It was loosely modeled on the Kennedys before all the tragedies.
Right. She expected total engagement. She expected excellence. The rules in this house were rigid.
Very rigid.
You didn't just casually walk out of the house with an unmade bed. But the detail that completely blew my mind was the ketchup rule.
Oh, the condiment policy. It's legendary.
Yes. You were strictly forbidden from ever bringing a ketchup bottle or a mustard bottle to the dining room table.
It was considered fundamentally unseemly.
Right. If you wanted a condiment, it had to be decanted in the kitchen into a specific little dish and served with a specific little spoon.
It sounds absurdly minor, I know.
It does, but it paints such a vivid picture of a mother who is insisting on imposing a very specific, deliberate order on her environment.
It was entirely about order and efficiency. And she actively used technology to enforce that efficiency.
Oh, the intercom.
Yes. She had a home intercom system installed that connected the upstairs kitchen to the basement bedrooms. Every morning, she wouldn't walk down to wake the kids.
She just buzzed them.
She would click the intercom from the kitchen and sing good morning to you, through the crackling speaker.
Just broadcasting her morning routine.
Precisely. It allowed her to wake the children without breaking her stride or stopping her breakfast preparations.
It was a time-saving tool.
It was. And this drive for efficiency culminated in her application of Kaizen.
I'm so glad you brought this up because Kaizen is a Japanese business philosophy, right? It's famously used by companies like Toyota to refine their manufacturing processes.
Seeking continuous incremental improvement year after year.
Yeah. And Mary Gates applied industrial manufacturing philosophy to family holidays.
She absolutely did. Take the family Christmas cards, for example.
Oh, this story is wild.
In the early fall, she wouldn't just sit down and write a nice letter. She would pull out her meticulous archived notes from the previous year's Christmas.
Wait, she kept metrics on Christmas.
She did. She would review the metrics of what worked and what failed. She'd have notes like, Dad has grave doubts about using the fake snow on the tree again. It was a miss.
That is hilarious. So analytical.
Then she would design a new, highly complex handmade card to ensure this year outperformed last year.
And these weren't just construction paper and glitter, right? The family literally formed an assembly line in the basement.
Sometimes they use a professional silkscreen press that they set up themselves.
A silk screen press for a family Christmas card.
Churning out hundreds of custom cards with witty, engineered poems and complex visual puzzles. It was a literal production run.
But the true masterpiece of her management style was the 1963 family road trip to Disneyland.
Oh, yes. The ultimate field trip.
Because for a normal family in the 60s, a road trip to California is just a vacation. You look out the window, you play the license plate game, you go to the theme park.
Right. You relax.
But for Mary Gates, this was an intensive cross-country data collection seminar. Before the trip, she went out and bought an IBM Selectric typewriter.
And we have to explain the Selectric to the listener, because in 1963, this wasn't just a regular typewriter.
No, this was the absolute peak of office technology. It didn't have the standard type bars that would jam together. It used this revolutionary swappable metal golf ball print head that zipped across the paper.
It was heavy, it was expensive, and she brought it on a family vacation.
She bought a specific cursive font ball for it.
Yes, and she used it to type up highly detailed travel logs for the children. They were required to complete 2 pages per day.
And she didn't want them writing about, how fun the hotel pool was.
No, she gave them strict analytical categories to fill out as they drove. Landforms, weather patterns, population distribution, land use, products, historical sites.
So they aren't just looking at the scenery. She is demanding that they actively catalog the economic and geographical outputs of the American West as it rolls by the car window.
They literally stopped at the Washington State Capitol Rotunda, and the kids counted all 262 steps to the top and logged it.
See, hold on. I hear Kaizen applied to Christmas cards and typing mandatory geographical reports on a family vacation, and I don't hear a nurturing environment. No. I hear an absolute nightmare of a pressure cooker for a kid. How did he not just completely break under that kind of constant structured demand?
It's a very natural reaction to hear that and think it sounds oppressive.
It sounds exhausting.
But if we look closely at the text and the outcomes, the synthesis is that it created a highly unusual psychological ecosystem. It combined towering, almost unreasonable expectations with an immense amount of psychological safety.
Okay, so she wasn't threatening them.
Exactly. The message wasn't, you must do this or we won't love you. The message was, you are capable of doing this, so why wouldn't you?
Ah, I see. So in this family, ambition wasn't a dirty word.
It wasn't something you had to hide or apologize for.
And that expectation of engagement applied to the adult world too, right?
Absolutely. The parents regularly hosted dinner parties with state governors, civic leaders, and major business figures.
And the kids weren't banished to the basement with the TV.
No. The young boy was expected to put on a tie, pour coffee for the governor, and actually listen to the conversation.
Wow.
He was absorbing by osmosis the idea that serious people sit around tables, discuss complex problems, and actually solve them.
Which brings us to the father, Bill Gates Jr., because he is the anchor in all of this. If Mary is the relentless, driving engine, the dad is the steady, pragmatist keel of the boat.
He was a 6'7" gentle giant, a World War II veteran, and a highly respected lawyer in Seattle.
And the context of his upbringing is vital here, I think.
Very much so. He grew up in Bremerton, which was a gritty, working-class Navy shipyard town across the water from Seattle.
Very different from Mary's upbringing.
Night and day. His own father, Trey's grandfather, owned a local furniture store, but he lived in a state of constant grinding financial anxiety.
He was really fearful, right?
Yes. He was the kind of man who would walk down the alley and pick up pieces of dropped coal to save a few pennies. He viewed education purely as a utilitarian tool to get a safe job, and he lived his life bound by very narrow, rigid rules driven by a fear of failure.
But Bill Jr. looked at that narrow life and rejected it.
He did, largely because he found a mentor next door.
Right, a local guy named Dorm Bramman, who is just this fascinating eccentric.
He literally built a castle in his yard.
A literal castle. And he preached a philosophy of having absolutely no personal limitations.
That mentorship opened the father's eyes. He went off to serve in the army during World War II, which he viewed as a profoundly formative crucible that made him into a capable man.
And there's a telling detail about his pragmatism from that era, too. He was born William Henry Gates III, but when he joined the military, he legally changed his suffix to Jr.
Right, because he felt that being the third sounded entirely too posh and patrician.
And he knew it would invite merciless mockery from drill sergeants. He wanted to succeed on his own merits, not on the perceived status of his name.
He brought that incredibly grounded, approachable energy to his family.
Like during their summer trips, right? When the summer rolled around, they would go to Hood Canal, staying in these rustic waterfront cottages called Cheerio Lodge.
And there, the towering, serious lawyer would completely shed his professional persona.
He became known as the mayor of Cheerio. At bedtime, he would lead 50 people, adults, kids, neighbors, in a massive conga line around the property.
Singing made-up absurd lyrics to the Colonel Bogey March from the bridge on the River Kwai.
He was the designated director of fun. He'd be holding his son's ankles, running down the grass in wheelbarrow races at the Cheerio Olympics.
But beneath that warm, playful exterior was a man with a profound, almost unshakable reverence for justice and objective rules.
His legal career and his observations of history really forged that deep belief in fairness.
They did. And the text mentions a specific historical event that deeply scarred his worldview, the Canwell Committee.
Right, and just to be completely impartial and provide historical context for the listener, we have to look at what that was. The Canwell Committee was essentially a local Washington state precursor to the McCarthyism of the 1950s.
It was a legislative committee hunting for communist sympathizers.
Yeah, and the father watched this committee systematically ruin the careers and lives of completely innocent university professors.
And what horrified him most wasn't just the politics of it. It was the procedural abuse.
The lack of fairness.
Exactly. These professors were denied the right to cross-examine their accusers. They weren't allowed to raise formal objections. Due process was completely thrown out the window.
And for a man who dedicated his entire life to the law, watching the machinery of fairness get hijacked like that left a permanent mark.
It cemented his core belief that strict rules, due process, and objective fairness are the only things keeping society from descending into chaos.
And he brought that deep structural demand for order directly into his household.
So now, if we step back, we can see the full architecture of the family software.
We have a grandmother teaching pure algorithmic game theory.
A mother demanding continuous, measurable improvement and data logging.
And a father instilling a towering, unyielding respect for logic, rules, and objective fairness.
It is an incredibly powerful, custom-built operating system.
It really is. But here is where the story hits a massive speed bump. Because what happens when you take a kid running this highly specialized hyperlogical family software and you forcefully plug him into a standard 1960s public elementary school?
The system crashes spectacularly.
It is a total incompatibility error. When he starts elementary school, he completely and utterly fails at being a normal child.
He just didn't fit the mold?
Not at all. Physically, he was tiny for his age. He had this unusually high-pitched, squeaky voice that made him stand out, and he had developed a habit of rocking back and forth constantly when he was thinking.
He later called it a metronome for his brain.
Right. He was so detached from the physical, mundane rituals of getting through a school day that he literally didn't know how to zip his own winter coat.
His older sister would have to physically wrestle him to the floor in the hallway just to zip him up before they left the house.
That is such an incredible image. The disconnect between his internal intellectual life and his external school environment was so severe that the school administrators were entirely baffled.
They didn't know what to do with him. A school speech therapist who was brought in to try and fix his squeaky voice observed him and actually labeled him with the word retarded.
Which, obviously, the text rightfully notes is a deeply offensive and dated term today.
Yes. But in the institutional language of the 1960s, it was the catch-all category they used for kids who simply could not process or conform to the standard classroom mold.
They genuinely suggested holding him back a grade because he seemed so unequipped for basic schooling.
Which is hilariously ironic.
Right, because just a little while earlier, a different expert had suggested skipping him ahead a grade because his reading comprehension was so off the charts.
So this kid is looking at these adults, the teachers, the therapists, and his logic processor is whirring.
He's thinking, if you suppose experts can't even agree on whether I'm a genius or if I need to be held back, why should I respect any of your systems? Why should I care about your opinions?
He was completely alienated by the standard metrics of success. And the most vivid illustration of this is his ongoing war with his fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Carlson.
Oh, the grading system argument. I love this story because it perfectly exposes how his mind was working.
The elementary school used a dual grading system, right?
Yeah. You received a letter grade for your academic performance, your actual grasp of the material, and a number grade for your effort.
So an A1 meant you did excellent, flawless work, and you applied maximum effort to achieve it.
Right. And an A3 meant you did excellent work, but you put in zero effort. You just breezed through it.
Now, to a normal teacher, an A1 is the ideal student. It shows diligence and hard work.
But to a kid who has been programmed by his grandmother to optimize algorithms, an A1 is horribly inefficient.
He looked at that grading scale and actively argued with Mrs. Carlson that an A3 should be considered the highest possible honor in the class.
He would literally ask her, please give me an A3 on this assignment.
Because an A3 represents maximum ratio optimization.
Exactly. You are achieving the absolute best possible outcome while burning the absolute minimum amount of processing power. To him, brute force effort was for people who didn't understand the system. Elegance was getting the A without trying.
And Mrs. Carlson just thought he was an arrogant, disruptive show-off.
Which, to be fair, he was being arrogant.
He was. But he was also completely, genuinely confused as to why the adult world rewarded inefficiency.
Right. When the school presented him with subjects he found boring, like sitting in a lab listening to Spanish lessons on a tape recorder, he would just completely power down. He wouldn't engage at all.
But when he stumbled onto a topic that actually interested him, his hyperfixations were legendary.
This is where that bloody cow lung comes back in. He was fascinated by human physiology.
He was probably looking at those transparent, layered plastic pages in the World Book Encyclopedia that showed the skeletal system, then the circulatory system, then the organs.
Oh, I remember those. He wanted to understand the mechanics of breath. So he brings a butchered lung into a fourth grade class. It's a perfect example. He had absolutely zero filter for social norms or politeness when he was in the pursuit of mechanical knowledge.
And we see this completely scale up a year later in fifth grade with the famous Delaware Report.
Oh, the Delaware Report is a masterclass in what happens when you let a mind like his control the parameters of a project.
The fifth grade teacher has the students draw numbers out of a hat to pick a U.S. state to profile.
And he draws his number, and he watches all his classmates picking the glamorous, easy states. California, Florida, New York.
So he makes a deliberately contrarian choice.
Of course he does. He picks Delaware, a tiny state known almost exclusively for its corporate-friendly tax laws.
I think of this as the ultimate analog deep dive. It proves that he was capable of monstrous amounts of work, but only when he set the rules.
Right. He didn't just go to the encyclopedia and copy down the state bird and the state flower. He turned into a one-man research machine.
He read thick historical volumes on the Underground Railroad's route through the state. He ordered stacks of tourism brochures.
But then he went further. He literally wrote a letter to the DuPont Corporation, which was headquartered there, and requested their annual corporate financial reports.
And he analyzed DuPont's board of directors, specifically noting the structural reality that it was entirely composed of male insiders.
What fifth grader is analyzing corporate governance structures? It's insane.
He also researched the complex chemistry of polymerization, explaining exactly how DuPont manufactured nylon. He built a comprehensive 400-year timeline of the state's history.
And to top it off, he creatively fabricated an entire journal from the perspective of an 18th century oyster fisherman to capture the historical economy.
He generated 177 pages of text for a fifth-grade state report.
And then he bound the entire thing by hand in a custom wooden cover that he made himself.
It's an astounding output. But this intense, isolated intellectual independence had a very dark side.
Yeah, the domestic fallout.
As his confidence in his own rational mind grew, he started to view the adults around him not just as flawed, but as obsolete.
He realized his teachers weren't perfectly logical.
He realized his parents weren't perfectly logical.
And his algorithmic brain concluded, if you aren't perfectly rational, why should you have authority over me? Why should I listen to arbitrary rules about making my bed or showing up to the dinner table on time?
This morphed into a brutal, toxic arrogance at home. He declared war on his parents.
He became incredibly nasty, particularly to his mother, Mary, because she was the primary enforcer of the household schedule.
He would just passively ignore her or actively demean her.
There's a moment he recounts in the text where his mother is desperately trying to draw him out, trying to get him to engage in a normal conversation. And he just glares at her and snaps, I'm thinking, don't you ever think? You should try it sometime.
The cruelty of saying that to a mother who has dedicated her entire life to her family's intellectual and cultural development is profound.
It really is. It shows a complete lack of empathy, a total short circuit in his emotional programming.
And this escalating domestic war finally culminated in a singular, explosive moment at the dinner table.
We don't know the exact topic of the argument, but he was sitting there, being his usual insulting, dismissive, smart aleck self, pushing every button.
And his father, the 6'7" gentle giant, the man who revered order and due process, a man who almost never lost his temper, finally snapped.
He reached across the dining room table, grabbed a glass of cold water, and threw it directly into his son's face.
And the kid's reaction to this shock to the system is chilling.
He doesn't yell, he doesn't start crying, he doesn't jump up, he just sits there in his chair. The water is dripping off his hair, running down his face, soaking his shirt.
What does he say?
He calmly looks at his dad, and with absolute icy detachment, he says, thanks for the shower. Then he slowly stands up and walks down to his room in the basement.
It is a terrifying display of emotional detachment and sheer immovable stubbornness. The family was in full crisis mode. The parent-child system had completely broken down.
And to their immense credit, instead of just clamping down harder, the parents made a crucial progressive decision for the 1960s. They sent him to a therapist.
Enter Dr. Charles Cressy.
Yes. And Dr. Cressy is not your standard soft-spoken child psychologist.
No, he was a former World War II fighter pilot.
He operated his practice out of a sunny Victorian house in Seattle. He mostly treated adults with failing marriages, but he agreed to take on this incredibly difficult, arrogant, shut-down kid.
What's truly fascinating here is the psychological mechanism Cressy used. He didn't try to overpower the boy.
He didn't give him moralizing lectures about respecting his elders or following the rules.
He engaged him in a kind of psychological martial arts. He used the kid's own intellectual momentum against him.
He treated him as an absolute equal.
Exactly. He assigned him heavy psychiatric reading, Freud, Jung, and discussed it with him. And after gaining his trust, Cressy made two profound strategic observations to the young boy. First, he looked at him and said, "You're a lucky kid." And second, he told him, "You're gonna win."
You're gonna win. I mean, think about what a crazy thing that is to tell a teenager who is actively engaged in a scorched earth war with his family. Doesn't that just validate his arrogance?
No, because Cressy reframed what winning meant. By win, Cressy meant that the boy was inevitably going to grow up, become an independent adult, and chart his own highly successful path. He helped the boy realize a fundamental mechanical truth about his situation. His parents actually loved him unconditionally. They weren't his enemies. They were his ultimate allies.
So fighting them was a massive, inefficient waste of his mental processing power.
Exactly. He's speaking his language. He's telling him to optimize his energy. He's saying, stop running this useless, endless conflict loop in your basement. You've already won the war at home. Now redirect your energy to the outside world where the actual challenges are.
And then Cressy pulls the ultimate move. He brings the parents into the office without the kid and gives them the exact same advice from the opposite side.
He tells Mary and Bill Sr., give it up, he's going to win.
Wow. If we extrapolate the impact of this intervention, it might be the single most important pivot point in the entire text.
I agree completely. For parents like Mary and Bill Sr. who deeply believed in order, discipline, and constant effort, being told by an expert to simply surrender control to a defiant teenager must have felt like a massive defeat.
It violated all their programming.
But they listened. They backed off. They gave him space.
And by giving him permission to win the war, Cressy allowed the boy to finally drop his defenses. He stopped fighting his family, and he started actively looking for new external challenges to conquer.
Which transitions us perfectly into the next phase of his life.
Because with the domestic ceasefire in place, he had all this combative, intense energy, and he needed an outlet. He needed to find his own tribe.
He needed people who matched his intensity, both physically and intellectually, because he was completely done with normal school cliques.
Let's examine the physical test first. He joins Boy Scout Troop 186.
But this isn't your standard suburban troop focused on tying knots and earning merit badges in a church basement.
No, this is a hardcore mountaineering troop operating in the Pacific Northwest during the huge outdoor boom of the 1960s.
And his first major expedition is a brutal 50-mile hike deep into the Glacier Peak wilderness.
And he shows up completely unprepared for the reality of it. His dad had bought him these beautiful, brand new, incredibly stiff Italian leather hiking boots from REI.
He doesn't bother to break them in, does he?
Not at all. By the end of the very first day, the friction has absolutely shredded his heels. The text provides this gruesome, vivid detail. Another scout looked at his feet and said his heels looked like the inside of a jelly donut.
Oh, man. Just raw, bleeding meat.
Exactly. But for most kids, that's the end of the trip, right?
Oh, you call a helicopter for that.
But he doesn't quit immediately. Driven by sheer stubbornness, he pushes on for days, hiking in excruciating pain.
Until an ear surgeon, who happened to be on the trip as a chaperone, finally steps in and gives him prescription codeine pills just so he can walk.
The 1960s were definitely a different era for wilderness medicine.
Indeed they were. Ultimately, he has to be evacuated halfway through the trek. He goes home feeling completely humiliated.
He assumes the entire troop thinks he's a weakling who couldn't hack it.
But instead, an older, elite scout in the troop named Mike Collier had watched him push through that agony. Collier saw the grit, so he invites him on a much more dangerous, highly exclusive private expedition.
The life-saving trail on the coast of Vancouver Island. The history of this trail is insane. It was literally hacked out of the dense coastal rainforest so that shipwrecked sailors could crawl their way back to civilization.
It's a nightmare landscape of deep bogs, sheer cliffs, and raging rivers.
They are out there completely autonomous. They are climbing down massive, rotting vertical ladders. They are sliding down muddy ropes.
At one point, they use avalanche cords to lash together a raft out of washed-up driftwood just to cross the freezing Klanawa River.
And if we look at the psychology of why he thrived in this terrifying environment, it makes perfect sense.
He absolutely hated standard organized sports. He hated football. He hated baseball.
Right. In those traditional environments, he was tiny, uncoordinated, and constantly being judged against standardized physical metrics. He felt small and useless.
But in the deep wilderness, the metrics changed. Success wasn't measured by how fast you could run a sprint. It was measured by sheer grit, stamina, and camaraderie.
It was a self-directed environment where the risks were lethal, but the rewards were entirely internal.
He found a physical arena where his incredible stubbornness was an asset, not a liability.
And right around the same time, he finds his intellectual match. He transitions to Lakeside, an elite private boys' school in Seattle, and he meets an 8th grader named Kent Evans.
Kent Evans is one of the most remarkable figures in this entire narrative.
He really is.
He was tall, somewhat pudgy, and he had a severe cleft lip that left his mouth full of complex orthodontia. He had endured incredibly painful reconstructive surgeries since infancy.
And perhaps because he'd faced so much early adversity and physical pain, Kent possessed a fearless, intense ambition that completely ignored what other people thought of him.
He was essentially a miniature adult walking the halls of a middle school. The text describes Kent's deep involvement in national democratic politics.
And just to be clear, keeping our impartial lens here, this isn't about the specific politics, it's about the level of mature engagement.
Absolutely. While other 13-year-olds were listening to the Beatles and talking about girls, Kent was canvassing door to door for Hubert Humphrey's presidential campaign.
He was reading dense policy books authored by Ted Kennedy. He was actively tracking ACLU court cases and debating the geopolitical merits of the Vietnam War.
He would literally stake out downtown Seattle hotels, waiting in the lobby just to try and shake hands with visiting presidential candidates.
That adult-level intensity completely fascinated our subject. They became inseparable best friends. And they didn't just hang out and play records.
No, they systematically analyzed the mechanics of historical greatness. They would spend hours on the telephone reading massive biographies of figures like Napoleon Bonaparte, General George Patton, and Douglas MacArthur.
They were actively plotting their lives. They would look at these historical paths and run algorithms on them.
They'd say, okay, MacArthur was programmed for the military from birth. Patton sort of fell into it through circumstance.
But wait, if we go into the military or the foreign service, the pay scale is too low to amass real power. Cross those off the list. They were 13 years old, running career simulations based on the lives of global conquerors.
It is an extraordinary level of intellectual play, but it often brings up a valid concern when people hear this.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
It's easy to look back now, knowing who he becomes, and say, oh, look at these young geniuses destined for greatness.
But realistically, weren't they just acting like pretentious miniature adults? Is there a danger in skipping childhood? Weren't they missing out on the fundamental experience of just being kids?
It's a natural reaction to have, especially in our modern culture, that highly values extended sheltered childhoods. But the text suggests a completely different interpretation.
What's that?
For kids wired with this specific kind of mental hardware, childhood as society traditionally defines it, playing kickball, trying to fit in with schoolyard cliques, worrying about middle school dances, was profoundly boring.
It didn't stimulate their processors.
Exactly. For Bill and Kent, their play was intellectual simulation. Discussing geopolitical strategy or reading dense policy books wasn't a chore, it was deeply fun.
So they weren't skipping childhood, they were just playing a much higher level game. They found joy in complexity.
Which brings us perfectly to the absolute powder keg of this story. We have this kid, he's been programmed with ruthless algorithmic logic by his grandmother.
He's been freed from his domestic conflict by a fighter pilot therapist.
He's fueled by the intense adult-level ambition of friends like Kent Evans. He is desperate for a complex system to conquer.
And then, in 1968, the Lakeside School accidentally provides the ultimate match.
The arrival of the teletype. This is a pivotal moment, not just in this personal history, but in technological history.
The Lakeside Mothers Club, which Mary Gates was involved in, holds their annual rummage sale.
And they raised $3,000. In 1968, that is a substantial amount of money for a school club.
Very substantial. And instead of buying new football uniforms or library books, they decide to lease a teletype ASR-33 terminal.
And we really need to explain what this machine was, because if you're picturing a Mac or a PC, you're entirely wrong.
Oh, completely wrong. It didn't have a screen. It looked like a heavy industrial typewriter welded to a large rotary telephone.
The actual computer wasn't even in the room.
Right. It was a massive time-shared mainframe located all the way down in California. To use it, you had to physically dial the phone number on the rotary dial, wait for the modem to screech and buzz to confirm the connection, and then place the phone handset into an acoustic coupler.
And when you typed your code on the keyboard, it didn't show up on a screen.
No, it physically punched holes into a long strip of yellow paper tape. Then you fed that tape back into the machine. It chugged loudly and sent the data over the phone line at a blistering speed of 10 characters per second.
The first program he writes on this mechanical beast is a simple 4-line addition code in the basic language. 10 IMQ XY 20 LET AAA XX plus Y, and so on.
He quickly moves on from that to writing a tic-tac-toe program and then a rudimentary lunar lander game.
And here is the absolute key to his entire psychological makeup. You have to understand the feedback loop of this machine.
Think about his past. He hated biology class because cutting up a flatworm seemed messy and pointless. He hated his 4th grade class because the grading system was subjective and relied on Mrs. Carlson's flawed human opinion.
But the computer was the ultimate, unforgiving, instantaneous judge.
The mainframe in California does not care if you're a straight-A honors student or the rebellious class clown.
It doesn't care if you have a squeaky voice or if your code is unzipped. If your underlying logic is flawless, the program executes perfectly.
If you misplace a single semicolon, or if your math is off by a fraction, the program crashes. Hard.
And because computer time was incredibly expensive, billed by the minute a mistake had real-world consequences, it punished sloppy thinking.
It rewarded pure, elegant logic. And for a kid whose brain had been trained by Gami to function as a state machine, this was an addictive, intoxicating rush.
It was a slot machine that paid out in pure intellectual validation.
And he wasn't the only one hanging around this noisy machine. He meets Paul Allen.
Paul is a 15-year-old sophomore, 2 years older than Bill. He's got these wild mutton chops. He plays the electric guitar. He reads obscure science fiction. And he considers himself the cool, intellectual Renaissance man of the school.
And Paul immediately figures out how to manipulate his younger friend's intense competitive drive. He constantly goads him.
He'd say, hey, I bet you can't figure this out. I bet you aren't smart enough to write this code.
Which was the exact right fuel to pour on the fire. But the real breakthrough, the thing that catapults them from hobbyists to experts, comes from an entirely unexpected outside connection. A woman named Monique Rona.
Monique Rona is one of those incredible historical figures who deserve their own movie.
Oh, absolutely. She was a French woman who, during World War II, had served as a decoy in the French resistance.
She literally rode her bicycle around, flirting with and distracting heavily armed German soldiers so they wouldn't notice the Jewish safe houses nearby. She was fearless.
Fast forward to 1968, she is the deputy director of the University of Washington Computer Lab, and she helps start a private company called Computer Center Core, or C-Cubed.
And C-Cubed had just leased a cutting-edge DEC PDP-10 mainframe computer. Now, in 1968, the hardware was the star. Software was largely an afterthought, and the operating systems were incredibly fragile and buggy. They crashed constantly.
So Mrs. Rona makes an unprecedented, wildly pragmatic offer to the kids at Lakeside.
She tells them, if you come to our office and actively try to find bugs in our software, we will give you free, unlimited time on our $500,000 computer.
They needed testers. They wanted brilliant monkeys with hammers to try and break the system before their actual paying corporate customers did.
And the kids absolutely lost their minds. Imagine the scenario. Imagine taking a 13-year-old kid today, handing him the keys to a multi-million-dollar particle accelerator at CERN, and the lead scientist telling him, just press all the buttons and try to break it. Have fun.
It is the ultimate intellectual playground. The level of obsession this offer triggered in him is staggering to comprehend. They essentially stopped living at home and started living at the C-Cubed offices, which were located in a converted old Buick dealership.
Let me walk you through his nightly routine during this period.
Ah, this is great.
It's the dead of winter in Seattle. It's 10 p.m. His parents are asleep upstairs. He sneaks out the window of his basement bedroom, creeps under the backyard deck, and walks in the freezing cold to the local hospital just to catch the late-night number 30 bus.
He rides it all the way to the C-Cubed offices. He lets himself in, sits down at a glowing terminal, and writes complex code until 2 a.m.
And if he codes too long and misses the last bus back, he just walks the 45 minutes home in the freezing dark, rewriting lines of code in his head as he walks.
He sneaks back in the window, sleeps for maybe 3 hours, until his mom clicks the intercom and sings "Good morning" to you.
And while they were there at C-Cubed, they weren't just playing simple lunar lander games anymore. Their ambitions scaled massively. They wanted to understand the deepest, most hidden architecture of the machine.
They wanted to learn machine code, the fundamental binary language of the computer's soul.
But the adult C-Cubed engineers wouldn't just hand over the proprietary manuals to a bunch of teenagers.
So what do? They go out back to the alley. Paul Allen, who is taller, physically boosts the 13-year-old up, and Bill literally dives headfirst into the giant C-Cubed garbage dumpster.
He is digging through wet coffee grounds, half-eaten sandwiches, and discarded styrofoam cups, desperately searching for crumpled dot matrix printouts of the Type PS-10 operating system source code that the engineers had thrown away.
They drag these stained, smelly papers back inside, spread them out on the floor, and spend hours reverse engineering the operating system line by line.
He is also building incredibly complex software of his own during these late-night sessions. He spends months writing a probabilistic war simulation program.
He actually goes to the library, researches the specific anti-aircraft fire rates from World War II battles, and codes a simulation that calculates the mathematical odds of bomber planes getting shot down based on variables like weather patterns and the presence of escort fighters.
He's doing this at 13.
But all good things, especially free things, must come to an end. Eventually, C-Cubed has to start paying off their massive computer lease. They get real clients.
They don't need the monkeys breaking the system anymore. The kids are officially cut off from the free time.
Desperate to keep coding, to keep that intellectual slot machine paying out, they use their deep reverse-engineered knowledge of the system to hack it.
They discovered a back door. They found out that if they pressed CTLC twice during a specific window in the login process, crashed the security protocol and gave them full administrator access.
They used this exploit to literally steal passwords from paying customers to try and sneak more free time.
And they get caught. The system administrators notice the drain. They get hauled into a corporate office.
And sitting behind the desk is this terrifying man in a dark suit with a sharp Van Dyke beard.
The kids are absolutely convinced he is an undercover FBI agent. He completely dresses them down, tells them they broke the law, threatens them, and they are officially permanently banished from the C-Cubed system.
It felt like a massive tragedy to them at the time. Their playground was locked.
But if we pull back and look at the macro analysis of this period, this was the absolute crucible of his development. Malcolm Gladwell famously wrote about the 10,000-hour rule, the idea that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate, intense practice to master any highly complex skill.
But the profound insight from this text is that none of those 10,000 hours matter at all if you don't get the first widely lucky 500 hours.
If the Lakeside Mothers Club hadn't decided to buy that specific teletype machine at that specific rummage sale, if Monique Rona hadn't made that crazy offer for free time on a PDP-10, the subsequent 9,500 hours of his career, the hours that built Microsoft, would simply never have happened.
He was in the exact right place, at the exact right time, with the exact right obsessive mental hardware to take advantage of it.
Which brings us to our final act, the system update. Because now, he is cut off from the computer. He's stranded in the analog world again.
But he has this newly discovered, highly honed superpower of relentless hyperfocus. And he has to point it somewhere, so he points it back at the mundane world of high school.
And he decides, for the first time in his entire academic life, to actually try. He decides to get straight A's.
Why? Not because he suddenly respects the grading system, but because Lakeside had a policy where only the elite honors students were granted free study privileges, the right to wander the campus and hang out unsupervised.
The average kids were locked in a strictly monitored study hall.
Yeah.
He realizes that if he wants his physical freedom, he has to play the institution's game and win it.
But, and this is one of the funniest, most psychologically revealing anecdotes in the whole text, his massive ego will not allow him to look like a tryhard. He has spent years cultivating this aura of the brilliant slacker who doesn't care about anything.
So he goes to the school watchman and book clerk, a guy named Joe Nix, and he secretly buys 2 UUO copies of every single textbook. Biology, Latin, history, mathematics, all of it.
He leaves one complete set pristine in his desk at school, and he smuggles the other set home to hide in his bedroom.
The lengths he goes to protect his image are amazing. He ensures that no student or teacher ever sees him carrying a book in the hallways.
He goes home, secretly studies for hours in his basement, memorizing the complex Latin declensions and the quadratic equations, and then shows up to school the next day, completely empty-handed, acting like he just naturally absorbs knowledge from the ether without trying.
Look at Gates. No books. How does he do it? You must be a genetic freak. That's exactly what he wanted them to think.
It's the exact same logic as the A3 grade in 4th grade, optimizing for maximum reward with the appearance of zero effort. But what he was actually doing in that bedroom wasn't just rote memorization, he was applying the superpower he honed on the PDP-10.
Exactly. He realized that true learning isn't just about reading words on a page and repeating them. If he focused intensely enough, his mind naturally built a mental scaffolding, a structural, logical architecture for the data.
He was looking for the underlying patterns. Once that framework was in place, he could instantly slot new, seemingly disparate facts into it. It wasn't memorization, it was pattern recognition.
And it works terrifyingly well.
Yeah.
He takes the regional math test as an 8th grader and absolutely destroys it, beating out the high school seniors.
And he finally finds a teacher he respects, a physics teacher named Gary Maestretti. Maestretti completely blows his mind by teaching him that science isn't just a boring list of dead facts to memorize for a test. He shows him that science is an ongoing, dynamic, violent argument with the universe.
But this raises a crucial point, and I think it's the most important takeaway for anyone trying to learn from this story. You have to ask, is this method of learning, this building of a mental scaffolding, something anyone can actually do? Or is this just the unique, unreplicable genetic architecture of a singular billion-dollar mind?
That is the million-dollar question, because if it's just genetics, what's the point of studying it?
We obviously have to acknowledge that he possessed immense innate processing power. His raw hardware was exceptional. But the method he used, the universal lesson here, is profound and replicable.
Learning is never about brute force memorization. It is about finding a framework that makes the data meaningful to you.
Just as he did when he wrote a 177-page report on Delaware. He didn't care about the state bird. He cared about corporate structure and economics, so he used that lens to understand the state.
When you find the underlying logic of a subject, when you build the scaffolding, the facts just naturally stick to the frame.
Okay, let's bring this all together. Let's synthesize this deep dive. We started this hour looking for the source code.
And what we found completely shatters that skyscraper myth we talked about at the beginning. It wasn't a clean, straight line of inevitable greatness. It was a highly precise, unbelievably lucky compilation of inputs.
It was the uncompromising algorithmic logic of his grandmother, Gami, at the card table, teaching him that the world is a decipherable system.
It was the immense civic and organizational pressure of his parents, demanding continuous improvement and forcing him to catalog the world.
It was the brilliant therapeutic intervention of Dr. Cressy, using psychological martial arts to give him permission to stop rebelling against his family.
It was the intense adult-level ambition of friends like Kent Evans running career simulations.
And it was the massive historical luck of a Mother's Club rummage sale, buying a teletype terminal at the exact moment he needed an unforgiving judge.
It is the ultimate chaotic combination of raw hardware and highly specific software.
And this brings us to a point of reflection for you, the listener. Think about your own source code. What structural algorithms run in your background? What were the unspoken family rules you absorbed?
What were your early failures or the bizarre, obsessive rabbit holes you went down when you were young?
And perhaps most importantly, what weird obsessions did you abandon because society or a teacher or a peer told you it wasn't normal or useful?
That hits hard. Because if he had listened to the speech therapist who labeled him, or the teacher who hated his A3 logic, or the people who told him he was weird for rocking back and forth, or for sneaking out to dig through a dumpster at 2 a.m., the world would look fundamentally different. Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We just spent this entire deep dive exploring how he unlocked his massive potential through long, unbroken stretches of intense hyper-focus. Whether he was reading an entire encyclopedia volume cover to cover or staring at a teletype terminal at 2 a.m, his superpower was sustained, deep, unyielding attention.
It was his ultimate advantage.
But in today's world, the very digital technology he helped create is designed to do the exact opposite. It constantly fractures our attention with notifications, pings, and endless scrolling feeds. You have to wonder, if a 13-year-old with that exact same raw hardware, that exact same potential, were born today, would he even be able to find the quiet, unbroken hours required to write his own source code?
Or is the architecture of our attention span completely broken?